Money is a tool. Financial literacy is a skill you can learn. My name is Dave Gallegos. I've spent the last 25 years in the mortgage industry with a front row seat to American financial habits. And what I have to offer is so much more than about mortgages. So join me for a journey into financial literacy, brought to you by me and Zenith Home Loans. I'm your host, Dave Gallegos. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to More Than Mortgages. This is episode number 7. So we're clipping along here pretty good. I hope you're enjoying it. Please, if you do like the content, please like the podcast if you don't mind. And even if you do mind, I'm just kidding. But like the podcast, share it, tell your friends. My goal here is to help as many people as I can become a more financially literate human and really have a more successful homeownership experience when it's all said and done. Because yeah, I'm in the mortgage business, and but I'm a big passionate believer in the value of becoming a homeowner. I think a big part of the wealth gap in this country has been created by the lack of homeownership between those that own homes and those that do not. And it is a life-changing, family, generational, wealth-changing experience becoming a homeowner. And so this podcast, the idea behind this podcast is to share as much as I've learned. I've had a front row seat over the last 26 years of seeing how Americans manage their finances. And it shocked me at first because I was like really surprised. I thought I was doing a lot worse than I was. And then I realized that there's just a lot of us that just don't ever get any financial education of any kind, which is wrong. And it's a tragedy. So that's a big part of what it is I'm trying to accomplish here. Is I want to try to help as many folks as I can avoid some of the mistakes that I made, that my wife and I made as we were getting going. And even if you find yourself later in life, how to maybe right the ship a little bit and make sure that you're going down the path that you want to go down. On the last episode, I spoke a lot at length about just credit in general and things that you can do to improve your credit. I say there's 5 fundamentals for financial balance. It's credit, it's your spending, it's your debt, it's your savings, and your investing, right? Those are the 5 fundamentals of financial balance. And I talk about having a vision for something better is really an important part of that, and you can. What I hope is that I give you hope. I hope that I give the listener hope to know that you can do anything you want when it comes to your finances. There's some things that obviously you have to be making a halfway decent living, but there's things that you can do to address that as well. But it starts with understanding that you're in complete control over this. You can have an excellent credit rating. You can live well within your means. You can eliminate all of your non-mortgage debt and live a life with financial peace. But it just takes effort, and it takes a desire to get there. And so it's a really important thing that you want to focus on. But today I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a detour and focus today on something, because we just got some information that just came out about how much housing appreciation has happened between the third quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2022. So in that year, how much home appreciation really took place. And the reason it's kind of noteworthy is because a lot of the talking heads, a lot of the people in the media, a lot of the people who, I don't know what their qualifications are to be giving us guidance and advice about what they think the future holds when it comes to housing and owning a home and things like that. But back in 2022, towards the end of 22 and the beginning of 23, they were telling us that home prices were going to drop, values were going to fall, and they were poised to fall significantly. And that's exactly wrong, right? That's exactly what didn't happen. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those reasons today without getting very, very specific. I don't have graphs because I know a lot of you don't listen to this or watch this on YouTube, but mostly it's listening. And there's some really important reasons. It's important for you to understand those reasons. If you can understand what's really going on, you're going to understand why getting yourself in a position to buy a home if you're currently not a homeowner sooner rather than later is really what you ought to do. And so there's something out there. One of my loan officers coined this phrase with one of her real estate agent partners because her real estate agent partner he was going to buy a Christmas present for his child, and it was a high demand Christmas present. And then the store that had him ran out and you couldn't find him anywhere. So he was forced to go online and see if he could find one. And some people had bought them and they were selling them for a profit. They had marked them up, like he had to pay an extra $50. And what he said to this loan officer that works here, he said, yeah, I have to pay the I should have bought sooner tax. And so we've kind of taken that and with a little play on words, we're calling it an ISBS. There's a hidden tax for people who aren't homeowners today that you're going to have to pay when you finally do buy a house. I've paid that tax many times in my life, right? The longer you wait, the purpose of this is to get you to understand that the longer you wait to buy a home, the more expensive homes are going to become. This is not a theory. This is a fact. And there's some really important things that are going on in the world that are going to make a home ownership more expensive as time goes on. Home ownership is not, homes aren't going to become cheaper somehow. Nothing's going to happen the government's not going to be able to step in and make houses cheaper. There's a bunch of reasons why, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you think about it, so from 2022 to 2023, home prices appreciated 5%. I'm going to put that into context for you. So if you were going to buy a $100,000 house in 2022, in 2023, that $100,000 house is going to cost you $105,000. That's the ISBS tax at work, right? A year later, it's worth $5,000 more, and that's what you're going to spend for it. If that's how much homes appreciate over a year. Now, I don't think there's any corner of America where you can buy a home that anybody really wants to live in that badly for $100,000. So in the Denver market where you operate, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 is more reasonable number for us to be talking about. So if it's a $500,000 house, if it were to go up 5%, that $500,000 house in 2022 is going to cost $525,000 in 2023. That's 5% of 500,000. So if you would have bought it in 2022, you'd only pay $500 for the house. But if you're buying it in 2023, you're going to pay $525,000 for the house. It's just how it's going to go. And 5% isn't a screaming hot housing market because it hasn't been a hot housing market. Interest rates rose in 2022, but starting at the mid-2022 range, and they rose all the way through until about October, November of 2023. I'm recording this the first couple of weeks of January in 2024, and rates started to fall back down like in November timeframe, and they've now back under 7%. But we got over 8 for a time there. And so it got pretty expensive. But a lot of people have been, because of what they hear in the media, a lot of people decided it would make more sense for them to wait to buy a home. And they're going to wait for home prices to decline. But home prices aren't going to decline. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why home prices are going to decline. And I'm going to go over a few of those with you right now. For me, I feel like there's 3 fundamental reasons why home prices aren't going to come down anytime in the foreseeable future. And the first reason, and I mean, like, I'm 63 years old. I was born in 1960. I intend to live to be 100. So in 2060, which is, 37 more years from now, home prices are going to cost more in 2060 than they are today. And depending on your age, if you're 30 years old, you got to ask yourself, do you think home prices are going to be less or more 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Are they going to cost less or are they going to cost more? You know instinctively they're going to cost more. And that's why it behooves you to listen to this podcast and listen and learn everything that you can about getting your finances in the best shape possible so that you can also become a homeowner. And the reason for that, we've talked about the reason why you want to be a homeowner, but it's not going to be cheaper. And if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, you think about 10, 20, 30, or 40 years from now, I just have to ask you a question. Do you think housing will be less expensive or do you think it'll be more expensive? And the answer is pretty clear. It's going to be more expensive. There's a whole bunch of reasons why. America is a growing country. It's always growing. There's a lot of immigrants that come here, and I'm not here to talk about the immigration issue in America, but growth is important for economy to grow. For an economy to grow, that's important for all of us because more growth means more opportunity and more economic opportunity for everybody. And so So we have that. And we also have, even though we're not having as many children today than as we had in years past, people aren't having as, couples that get married don't have as many kids. There's still, this population's still scheduled to grow. And statistically, if you go out and you do the research, you're going to find that the population of America, as well as the population of the world, is expected to continue to increase at least until the end of this century. And so at least until the year 2100, right? So, and everybody who's listening to this is going to at least be alive through then. So I don't think that you have to be too concerned about the fact. So if you know that you live in a place, America, everybody wants to live here. Everybody, the people who come to America for the one reason and one reason only: economic opportunity, right? And homeownership is a big part of that, because we have a robust housing, homeownership, economy, and government approach to homeownership. It's good for everybody. So if you know that the population's projected to grow, you just have to answer one question: where's everybody going to live, right? Everybody's going to want to live in a home. Everybody needs a place to live. So you already know that housing demand is not going to go down anytime soon. That's globally. That's a macro view. Here's the micro view. A little more of a micro view is that household formations over the next 10, 15 years are on the rise. And that means, so young people are getting married later, and they're not getting married in their 20s anymore. More often than not, they're getting married in their early 30s. They're putting off home ownership for those years. They're putting off buying a home longer. But once they hit their 30s, their early, mid, and late 30s, they're getting married, they're forming another household. And if they're having children and they're going to start a family, the people want to buy a home. I know that my wife as soon as we had our first child, my wife wanted, we need to buy a house, and we bought a house. That was the deal. So it's just a typical thing that we do. Most of us, if you're listening to this podcast, odds are you were raised in a home of your own. So you're going to want a home of your own for your family as well. And household formations are projected to rise dramatically over the next few years. That's the first section. The second thing is that people used to live in their homes, and then when they got older and they didn't need all the room, they would sell their home and they would downsize. That's happening a lot less today than it used to. And there's a bunch of reasons why. Because of the continuing rise in home prices and the lack of inventory for seniors that are out there, they can't downsize because they don't want to go live in what they can afford to downsize into. And if they're living in a home now, they're like, yeah, they're not selling their home. So fewer seniors are moving on from their houses. They're aging in place longer. So that's one of the reasons why there's less inventory. And with less inventory, that there's still demand, but no inventory means, so it's just a supply and demand issue. And that's what's really important to understand. And then the third thing is home builders aren't building as much as they could be building, or as much as they've built in the past. I don't have the exact numbers, and I could put up the graphs. What's important to understand is that home builders can't keep up with the demand for a bunch of reasons. They call it the 3 L's. It's land, labor, and lumber, right? So the land part it's just a lot more expensive. All the municipalities around this country have made it a lot more cumbersome and a lot more expensive to go through the approval process and to pay all the fees and all the permitting and all of the studies and all the environmental studies and all the things that a home builder has to do. It's just more and more cumbersome all the time. And it costs more and it takes a long time. There's a development south of Denver called Sterling Ranch, great development. It took 10 years just to get the Sterling Ranch development approved before they even broke ground. 10 years of approval. Just think about how much that would cost, having to keep that land all that time and not earn any income on it and do all the work just to get the project approved. Now it's going gangbusters. And I think what I heard, I don't know where it's at now, but I think when they first started, it was going to be a 12,000 home development. But it took 10 years just to break ground. So that's how long it's taking. Builders aren't building as much. So that's the land part. The labor part is it's hard to get all the help that we need, all the skilled labor for the trade unions that we need to get the homes built. That's the second thing. It's just harder. There's not as many people in the trades. So it just takes builders longer to build. And then the last one is lumber. It's just more expensive to build now than ever. All the materials, everything costs more. Everything's a little bit harder to source. And so all of those things mean that builders just can't build at the pace that they used to build. Now let's go back to the mortgage meltdown and the Great Recession leading up to it, 2006, 7, and 8, that was a completely different time. And it's the only time, there's some graphs out there that'll show you that over the last 78 years, the housing market in America has been, I think the statistics are, it's 74-3, 74-5 and 1 or something like that, meaning the 74 out of 78 years, the home prices have gone up. 4 of those years, the home prices went down, and 2 of those years, there was no improvement. The price didn't go up, the price didn't go down. So what's the deal with those 4 or 5 years? Well, those 4 or 5 years were the Great Recession, and it was the mortgage meltdown. And builders helped to contribute to this issue because we didn't realize what was happening at the time. We kind of knew what was happening, but we didn't really know, and created a lot of false demand. So we had these really loose lending standards where you could get a mortgage, and you can't do this today, but you could get a mortgage without proving whether or not you qualified for the mortgage. And if somebody was going to, a lot of these loans at first, they were built for self-employed borrowers who write off a lot of their income, and they're making a lot of money, but they don't report the income. That doesn't show up that way. And so that's where the stated income loan programs first came in. They were designed for people like that had great credit, big down payments, and just didn't report all the income that they could have reported because they wanted to avoid paying tax on it, and they expense more against it. Nobody was committing fraud, I don't think. So they needed to have stated income programs. So you had to have, usually when those first started, you had to put a lot of money down. And over time, those standards got looser and looser to the point where you could get 100% financing without proving how much money you would make. And then you could get 100% financing without proving how much money you make on an investment property. And that's when the world went crazy. So as soon as you didn't have to prove how much money you made, as long as you had a decent enough credit score and you qualified for the program, you could buy an investment property, which means it's a spec deal now. You're not planning on keeping the property. So housing was so hot back then that people would line up. You remember the stories. If you haven't, you can go back and find them. People were lining up when the builders were getting ready to release new lots, and there was a lottery, and people would spend the night waiting for the new lots to be released because they knew that if they get a house under contract, it took 7 to 9 months for the house to get built. And over that 7 to 9 months, the price of the house would continue to rise, that before you even had to close on it, you could sell it to somebody else for more money. So it was tulip mania. If you've ever, probably don't know what tulip mania is, but if you do, you know that tulip mania was caused back in Holland in the 1600s. They traded tulip bulbs, and, people were paying crazy money for tulips until one day people went, wait, these tulip bulbs aren't worth anything. And the whole market imploded on itself. Same thing happened with Beanie Babies. And it happened in the housing market in 2006, 7, and 8. And it's what led to the mortgage meltdown. So all at once, people figured out that there wasn't any real demand for housing. People were just doing a lot of speculating, and the builders, meanwhile, had ramped up, and they were building tons of inventory that they were going to sell to all these people. And then the market imploded. All of a sudden, there was no market for those mortgages, so all the lenders that had approved all of these people had to go to them and say, sorry, you can't get a mortgage. This is like the Reader's Digest version of what really took place. And so all of those people had to back out of those contracts, and the builders were left with a bunch of homes that they had started that they had no buyer for. Just multiply that across all of the counties and all of the cities and towns in America where they were building lots of homes, and you have a recipe for a financial disaster. So those are the only years in the history of the housing market, going back 75 years, where those are the years that the home prices went down in value. I'm telling you this story because More Than Mortgage is a podcast that's designed to help you do a better job of managing your finances so that you can be in the best position possible to be able to buy a home and successfully buy and own a home. And that's what I want for everybody who's listening to this podcast. But I want to get across to you the importance of doing it sooner rather than later. The ISBS tax is a real thing. I should have bought sooner. So the best time to buy a house would have been 20 years ago. The next best time to buy a house would be today. It's the same thing when it comes to planting a tree. The best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. But if you didn't plant a tree 20 years ago, then you got to buy one now. And here's the message that I want you to take from today's podcast. You got to get in the market. You just got to. Now, I don't want you to get into the market foolishly. I don't want you to get into the market when you're not ready. I want you to be financially sound, and we'll talk about that in the podcast ahead, the kind of position that you need to find yourself in with your credit, with your spending, with your debt, and with your savings before you take the leap to buy a home. But make no mistake about it. You owe it to yourself and your family and your children and the future generations in your family that don't even know you and that you don't even know yet, that you need to put yourself in a position where you can be a homeowner and create that generational wealth that homeownership provides. I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like this and share this episode, and don't get caught paying too much of that ISBS tax. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to More Than Mortgage with Dave Gallegos, brought to you by Zenith Home Loans. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe anywhere you find podcasts and share this episode with a colleague who would also find value.